The woman standing in the middle of Fletcher Vaughn's kitchen at dawn looked like she had crawled through hell itself to get there. Her dress torn and muddy, her dark hair matted with dust and blood, and her green eyes wide with terror as she pressed herself against the wall clutching a cast iron skillet like a weapon. Fletcher froze in the doorway, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip, before he registered that this bedraggled creature was no real threat, despite her defensive posture. Behind him, he heard the footsteps of his 3 sons thundering down the stairs, no doubt drawn by whatever noise had woken him in the first place. The ranch house sat 5 miles outside Dalhart, Texas, far enough from town that unexpected visitors were rare and usually trouble. "Papa, wait." That was Daniel, his eldest at 19, pushing past him into the kitchen with young Thomas and Michael right behind. All 3 boys stopped short at the sight of the woman, who looked ready to bolt like a spooked mare despite having nowhere to run. "Easy now," Fletcher said, raising both hands slowly and taking a careful step forward. He was 42 years old, had been running this cattle ranch for nearly 2 decades, and he had seen plenty of strange things in his time, but a woman appearing in his kitchen before sunrise was a new experience. "Nobody here is going to hurt you, miss. You can put down the skillet." She did not lower her makeshift weapon. Up close, he could see she was shaking, whether from cold or fear or exhaustion he could not tell. Her dress had once been a decent traveling outfit in dark blue calico, but it was now little more than rags. Bruises mottled her arms and there was dried blood on her temple. She looked to be in her mid-20s, though the dirt and fear made it hard to be certain. "How did you get in here?" Fletcher asked, keeping his voice gentle. His wife Sarah had died 3 years ago from fever, and the house had been without a woman's presence since then. The kitchen still held her touches, the curtains she had sewn, the dishes she had arranged just so on the shelves. "The door was unlocked," the woman whispered, her voice hoarse and cracked. "I am sorry. I did not know where else to go. They were chasing me." "Who was chasing you?" Daniel asked, moving to stand beside his father. The boy had his mother's compassionate nature, and Fletcher could see concern written all over his sun-browned face. "Men," she said simply, and then her legs seemed to give out. She slid down the wall, still gripping the skillet, and sat heavily on the floor. "Bad men. They killed everyone in the wagon train. I ran. I just ran and ran until I saw your lights." Fletcher exchanged a glance with Daniel. Wagon trains sometimes pass through this part of Texas, heading west toward New Mexico territory or south toward Mexico itself. It was 1887, and while the worst of the Indian Wars were over, bandits and outlaws still plagued the territory. The railroad had brought some civilization, but out here on the edges of the Panhandle, law was still a fragile thing. "Thomas, go fetch some water from the pump," Fletcher said quietly. "Michael, get a blanket from the linen closet. Daniel, check outside, see if anyone followed her here." His sons moved quickly, well trained to follow orders. Fletcher crouched down a few feet from the woman, giving her space but meeting her eyes. "My name is Fletcher Vaughn. Those are my boys. You are safe here, but I need to know what happened. When did this attack occur?" "Yesterday afternoon," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were 2 days out from Dalhart, heading west. There were 12 of us, families mostly. The men came out of nowhere, dozens of them with their faces covered. They wanted the goods we carried, but when Mr. Patterson refused, they started shooting." Her eyes filled with tears that cut clean tracks through the dirt on her face. "I hid under one of the wagons. After they left, I waited until dark and then I just started walking. I did not know which direction, I just walked." Thomas returned with a dipper of cool water and Fletcher took it from him, offering it to the woman. She finally released her death grip on the skillet to accept it, drinking desperately. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, leaving a clean streak on her skin. "What is your name?" Fletcher asked. "Katherine," she said. "Katherine Cole. Most people call me Kate." Daniel came back inside, shaking his head. "No sign of anyone, Papa. Ground is hard, difficult to track in the dark, but I did not see any fresh prints near the house besides hers." "Good." Fletcher stood, his knees creaking slightly with the movement. He was not an old man, but ranch work aged a person. "Miss Cole, you are welcome to stay here until we can sort this out. We need to ride into Dalhart at first light, report this to the sheriff. He will need to organize a party to go out to where the attack happened." "They will kill me if they find me," Katherine said, clutching the blanket Michael had draped over her shoulders. "They will know I can identify them." "Then we will make sure they do not find you," Fletcher said firmly. "For now, you need food and rest. Daniel, help me get her up to the guest room. Thomas, stoke up the stove and make some coffee. Michael, there is some of that stew left from supper, warm it up." Katherine protested weakly as Fletcher and Daniel helped her to her feet, but she was clearly exhausted beyond measure. They guided her up the narrow stairs to the small guest room that had once been meant for Sarah's mother before she passed. The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. Fletcher left Daniel to help Katherine get settled while he went back downstairs to talk with his other sons. In the kitchen, Thomas had the fire going in the big iron stove, and the smell of coffee was beginning to fill the room. At 16, Thomas was the quiet one, thoughtful and steady. Michael, at 14, had more energy than sense most days, but he had a good heart. Both boys looked to their father with questions in their eyes. "We are going to help her," Fletcher said before either could ask. "I do not know the whole story yet, but a woman does not show up looking like that unless something terrible happened. You think she is telling the truth?" Michael asked. "About the wagon train, I do," Fletcher said. "You do not get bruises and blood like that from making up stories. We will ride into town after breakfast, talk to Sheriff Morrison. He will know if any wagon trains have gone missing." Daniel came back downstairs, his expression troubled. "She is asleep already, Papa. Just sat down on the bed and her eyes closed. I pulled her boots off and covered her with the quilt." "Poor thing must be exhausted," Thomas said, pouring coffee into tin cups for all of them. Walking all night across the prairie in the dark. They sat around the kitchen table as the sky outside began to lighten from black to deep blue. Fletcher sipped his coffee and thought about the situation. Harboring a woman fleeing from outlaws could bring trouble to his doorstep, but turning her away was not something he could live with. Sarah would have taken Katherine in without a second thought, would have already had her bathed and fed and tucked into bed with warm bricks at her feet. "Papa," Daniel said slowly, "if her whole wagon train was killed, she has nowhere to go. No family, probably lost everything she owned." "I know," Fletcher said. "So she might need to stay here for a while," Daniel continued, "until she can figure out what to do." Fletcher looked at his eldest son, seeing something in his face that gave him pause. Daniel had been only 16 when Sarah died, and he had taken on so much responsibility since then, helping to raise his younger brothers, managing a good portion of the ranch work. He was a man now in all the ways that mattered, and the look in his eyes when he spoke about Katherine was not just compassion. "We will see what the situation is," Fletcher said carefully. "First things first, we talk to the sheriff." They waited until the sun was fully up before Fletcher, and Daniel saddled their horses for the ride into Dalhart. Thomas and Michael would stay at the ranch to tend the cattle and keep watch. Fletcher left his rifle with Thomas and strict instructions to shoot first and ask questions later if any strangers approached the house. The ride into Dalhart took about an hour at a steady pace. The town had grown considerably since the Fort Worth and Denver Railway came through a few years back. What had once been little more than a dusty crossroads now boasted a proper main street with a hotel, a general store, a saloon, and a sheriff's office. The cattle pens by the railroad tracks were full of longhorns waiting to be shipped east, and the air smelled of dust and manure and prairie grass. Sheriff Ed Morrison was in his office, a weathered man in his 50s with a gray mustache and sharp blue eyes. He listened without interrupting as Fletcher told him about Katherine's arrival and her story. When Fletcher finished, Morrison leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I had a telegram come through yesterday evening from Fort Worth," he said. "Report of a wagon train that failed to arrive in Amarillo on schedule. That would match up with what your Miss Cole is saying. They were expected 4 days ago." "So it is true," Daniel said. "Appears so." Morrison stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. "Question is, what am I supposed to do about it? I have got 2 deputies and a town to watch over. Tracking down a band of outlaws big enough to take out a whole wagon train is work for the Rangers or the Army." "But you will investigate," Fletcher pressed. "I will send a wire to the Rangers in Amarillo, let them know we have got a survivor. They will want to talk to her, get descriptions of the attackers. And I will take a few men out to see if we can find where it happened, though if she walked all night she could have come from anywhere within 20 miles. Morrison turned back to face them. "Is she in any condition to talk?" "She was unconscious from exhaustion last I saw," Fletcher said. "Give her a day or 2 to recover and I will bring her to town." Morrison nodded. "That is fair. In the meantime, you keep a close watch on your place. If these outlaws think there might be a witness, they could come looking." The warning sat heavy in Fletcher's gut as he and Daniel rode back to the ranch. The sun was high now, beating down on the dry Texas prairie. Summer of 1887 had been brutal, with little rain and temperatures that made working the cattle a test of endurance. The grass was brown and brittle and the stock tanks were getting low. When they arrived back at the ranch, they found Thomas and Michael in the barn, tending to the horses. "She still sleeping?" Fletcher asked. "Has not made a sound," Thomas confirmed. "We have been checking every hour or so." Fletcher nodded and headed into the house. The kitchen was warm, and there were dirty dishes in the wash basin from breakfast. He climbed the stairs quietly and paused outside the guest room door, listening. Hearing nothing, he eased the door open and looked inside. Katherine was awake, sitting up in the bed with the quilt pulled around her shoulders. She had washed her face and hands in the basin, and with the dirt removed, he could see she was younger than he had first thought, probably not yet 25. Her hair, now that it was no longer matted with dust, was a rich chestnut brown, and her eyes, though still frightened, had some clarity to them. "Mr. Vaughn," she said, her voice still hoarse, "I apologize for the intrusion. I should not have entered your home without permission." "Under the circumstances, I think we can forgive the trespass," Fletcher said, stepping into the room but staying near the door. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle," she admitted, "but alive, which is more than I expected to be." "I rode into town, spoke with the sheriff. He had a telegram about a missing wagon train. He will want to talk to you when you are up to it, get descriptions of the men who attacked you." Katherine nodded slowly. "I will help however I can. Those men, they murdered good people. Families with children. Mr. Patterson and his wife had 3 little ones, the youngest just a baby." Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Fletcher felt a surge of anger at the senseless violence. "I am sorry you had to witness that. No one should have to go through such a thing." "I keep thinking I should have done something," Katherine said quietly. "Should have tried to help, should have fought them somehow." "You would be dead," Fletcher said bluntly. You did what you had to do to survive. There is no shame in that." She looked at him with those green eyes searching his face for something. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me. I could be lying, could be bringing trouble to your door." "Could be," Fletcher acknowledged, "but I do not think you are. And even if there is trouble coming, well, that is what rifles are for. You are safe here, Miss Cole. You have my word on that." Something in her expression softened, and for the first time since he had seen her, she looked less like a cornered animal. "Thank you," she whispered. Over the next few days, Katherine slowly began to recover. The bruises on her arms faded from purple to yellow-green, and the cut on her temple scabbed over. She was quiet and jumpy, startling at sudden noises and avoiding the windows, but she insisted on making herself useful. Despite Fletcher's protests, she took over the cooking, and the ranch house kitchen suddenly smelled like it had when Sarah was alive, full of fresh bread and stewing meat and apple pie made from their small orchard's fruit. Daniel was hovering around her constantly, finding excuses to be in the house when he should have been out working cattle. Fletcher noticed but said nothing, watching the way his son's eyes followed Katherine as she moved around the kitchen, the way he jumped to help her reach things on high shelves or carry heavy pots. On the fourth day after Katherine's arrival, Fletcher took her into town to speak with Sheriff Morrison. She had borrowed one of Sarah's old dresses, which Fletcher had packed away in a trunk after her death. It fit Katherine reasonably well, though she was taller than Sarah had been, and the hem came up a bit short on her ankles. She sat stiffly on the wagon seat beside Fletcher as they rode, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You do not have to do this if you are not ready," Fletcher said. "I am as ready as I will ever be," Katherine replied. "Those men need to be caught. They need to face justice for what they did." In Morrison's office, Katherine gave a detailed account of the attack. She described the bandits, their horses, the direction they had ridden after they had finished looting the wagons. Morrison wrote everything down carefully, then sent a telegram to the Texas Rangers with the information. "They will send someone out to investigate," Morrison told them. "Probably take a week or two. In the meantime, Miss Cole, where are you planning to stay? The hotel is not much, but it is safe enough." Katherine looked down at her hands. "I do not have any money, Sheriff. Everything I owned was in that wagon train." "She is staying at my ranch," Fletcher said firmly, "until she decides what she wants to do next." Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "That is generous of you, Vaughn. Just be careful. If these outlaws get wind that there is a witness, they might come looking." "Let them come," Fletcher said flatly. On the ride back to the ranch, Katherine was quiet for a long time before she finally spoke. "I was traveling to meet my fiancé," she said softly. "He went ahead to California 6 months ago, got work at her ranch near Sacramento. He sent for me, bought my passage on that wagon train. His name was Robert." Fletcher heard the past tense in her words. "Was. He will think I am dead," Katherine said. "By now, news will have reached California about the wagon train. He will have gotten a telegram saying there were no survivors. He will mourn me and move on with his life." "You could write to him," Fletcher suggested. "Let him know you survived." Katherine shook her head. "What would be the point? I have no money, no way to reach California now. It would take months to earn enough for passage, and by then—" She trailed off. "By then he might have found someone else," Fletcher finished. "Yes." She looked out at the prairie, at the endless brown grass stretching to the horizon. "Besides, I am not sure I want to go anymore. Robert and I barely knew each other. Our parents arranged the match. He seemed kind enough in his letters, but I was traveling across the country to marry a stranger. Maybe this is God's way of giving me a different path." Fletcher did not know what to say to that, so he kept quiet and let the horses set their own pace. When they arrived back at the ranch, Daniel was waiting in the yard, and the way his face lit up when he saw Katherine climb down from the wagon told Fletcher everything he needed to know about how his son felt. The days turned into weeks, and Katherine became a fixture at the Vaughn ranch. She proved to be a hard worker, not content to just cook and clean, but insisting on helping with other chores as well. She learned to gather eggs from the temperamental hens, to churn butter, to tend the kitchen garden that had grown wild after Sarah's death. She had a way with the younger boys, treating Thomas's quiet nature with respect and channeling Michael's energy into productive tasks. But it was with Daniel that she truly seemed to blossom. Fletcher would watch them together, talking and laughing as they worked, and he saw his son falling deeper in love with each passing day. The boy was smitten. There was no other word for it, and Katherine, whether she realized it or not, was beginning to feel the same way. One evening in late August, Fletcher was sitting on the porch after supper when Daniel came to join him. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red, and the cicadas were singing their evening song. Daniel sat down on the porch step and was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Papa, I need to talk to you about something," he said. "I figured you might," Fletcher replied, lighting his pipe. "It is about Katherine." Daniel turned to look at his father. "I know she came here under terrible circumstances, and I know she might still be in danger. But I cannot stop thinking about her. I care for her, Papa. I think I might even love her." Fletcher took a long pull on his pipe, letting the tobacco smoke curl up into the evening air. "Have you told her how you feel?" "No, I did not know if it would be appropriate. She is a guest in our home, and she has been through so much. I do not want to add to her burdens." "Son, the only way to know how she feels is to tell her how you feel," Fletcher said. "But you need to understand something first. Katherine has lost everything. She is vulnerable right now, and she might feel obligated to you because you and your brothers begged me to let her stay here." Daniel looked surprised. "We begged you." "Maybe not in so many words," Fletcher said with a slight smile. "But I saw it in your faces that first morning. All three of you, looking at me with those eyes, silently asking me to help her. I would have helped her anyway, but knowing my boys wanted it made the decision easier." "I would never want her to feel obligated," Daniel said earnestly. "If she does not feel the same way I do, I will accept that." "But I have to know, Papa. I have to at least try." Fletcher nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing to speak to her. But Daniel, be prepared for any answer she might give. And remember, she is still healing from what happened. She might not be ready for anything beyond friendship." "I understand," Daniel said. He stood up, then paused. "Did you know right away? With Mama, I mean. Did you know she was the one?" Fletcher smiled, remembering. "Your mother and I grew up together, so it was different, but yes, I think I knew. There was a moment. We were about your age, and we were at a barn dance. She was wearing a yellow dress, and she laughed at something someone said, and the whole room just lit up. I knew right then that I wanted to hear that laugh for the rest of my life." "I feel that way when Katherine smiles," Daniel admitted. "Like the sun came out even if it is the middle of the night. Then talk to her, son. Life is too short to leave words unsaid." The next day, Fletcher took Thomas and Michael out to check on the north pasture, leaving Daniel and Katherine alone at the ranch house. It was deliberate on his part, giving his son the opportunity he needed. When they returned in the late afternoon, Daniel was grinning like a fool, and Katherine had a shy, pleased expression on her face. That night at supper, Daniel cleared his throat and made an announcement. "Katherine has agreed to let me court her properly," he said, his voice filled with pride and happiness. "With your permission, Papa." Thomas and Michael whooped and cheered, and even Fletcher could not help but smile. "You have my permission," he said, "and my blessing." Katherine blushed prettily, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I want to be clear," she said, looking around the table at all of them. "I am not accepting Daniel's courtship out of obligation or because I feel I owe this family anything. I am accepting because he is kind and good, and because when I am with him, I feel safe and happy. Two things I did not think I would ever feel again. That is all any of us could ask for," Fletcher said sincerely. The courtship was sweet and earnest, conducted under the watchful eyes of Fletcher and his two younger sons. Daniel and Katherine would take walks in the evening, staying within sight of the house, talking for hours. On Sundays, they would all ride into Dalhart for church services, and the whole town began to take notice of the pretty young woman who had survived the wagon train massacre and the rancher's son who was courting her. There was some gossip, of course. Some of the town women thought it inappropriate for an unmarried woman to be living at the Vaughn ranch with 4 men. But most people understood the circumstances and approved of Fletcher giving Katherine shelter. The few who dared to speak ill found themselves on the receiving end of sharp words from the more charitable members of the community. In September, a Texas Ranger named Captain Jack Brennan arrived in Dalhart to investigate the wagon train attack. He was a hard man with eyes that had seen too much violence, but he was thorough and professional. He interviewed Katherine at length, going over every detail of her story, then rode out with a small posse to try to locate the site of the massacre. They found it 3 days later, about 18 miles northwest of Dalhart. The wagons had been burned, and the bodies of the victims had been left for the scavengers, but there was enough evidence to confirm Katherine's account. Brennan brought back personal effects that had been overlooked by the outlaws, including a small Bible that had belonged to Katherine's traveling companion, a widow named Mrs. Henderson. Katherine wept when Brennan gave her the Bible, holding it close to her chest. Daniel sat beside her on the porch, his arm around her shoulders, letting her grieve. It was a turning point, Fletcher thought, watching them. Katherine had been in a kind of suspended state since arriving at the ranch, focused on survival and recovery. Now, confronted with the physical proof of what she had lost, she had to face the reality of it. "The men who did this are still out there," Brennan told Fletcher privately. "We found their trail, but it went cold in the rocks to the west. Could be they headed into New Mexico territory, could be they are holed up somewhere waiting for things to cool down. I will keep looking, but I wanted you to know that Miss Cole might still be in danger." "We will keep watch," Fletcher assured him, "and we are all fair shots with a rifle." "Good." Brennan tipped his hat. "You are doing a good thing taking her in. Not many men would." After the ranger left, Fletcher increased the watch on the ranch. He and his sons took turns staying up at night, keeping guard with loaded rifles. They set up a system of signals so that if anyone approached the property, the person on watch could alert the others. It made for long, tiring days, but no one complained. In October, as the weather began to cool and the threat of the outlaws seemed to fade, Daniel came to Fletcher with a request. They were in the barn, mending tack, when Daniel set down the piece he was working on and turned to his father. "I want to ask Katherine to marry me," he said without preamble. "I know it has only been a few months, but Papa, I am sure, she is the one I want to spend my life with." Fletcher had been expecting this, but hearing it still made his heart clench. His eldest son, his firstborn, was ready to start his own family. It was the natural order of things, but it still felt too soon, too fast. Daniel was only 19, barely more than a boy himself. But then again, Fletcher had been only 20 when he married Sarah, and they had built a good life together. Age was just a number. What mattered was the strength of the commitment. "Have you talked to Katherine about this?" Fletcher asked. "Not directly, but we have talked about the future. She wants the same things I want. A home, A family, a place to belong. I can give her that, Papa. I want to give her that. Marriage is not easy, Fletcher said carefully. It takes work and patience and a willingness to put someone else's needs before your own. Your mother and I had good years, but we also had hard times. Drought years when the cattle died and we did not know how we would make it through. Times when we fought and did not speak for days. It is not always romance and sweet words. I know that, Daniel said. I remember the hard times. But I also remember how you and Mama always worked through them. How you were always a team, no matter what. That is what I want with Katherine. I want to be her partner, her protector, her friend. I want to build a life with her. Fletcher looked at his son, seeing the determination in his eyes, the maturity that had come from loss and responsibility. Daniel was ready for this. Whether Fletcher was ready to let him go was another question, but that was not what mattered. "Then you have my blessing," Fletcher said. "Again. Ask her properly, get her a ring if you can afford one. Do it right." Daniel's face split into a huge grin. "Thank you, Papa, thank you." The proposal happened on a Sunday afternoon in late October. Daniel took Katherine for a walk down to the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the property. Fletcher watched them go from the porch, his heart full of mixed emotions. Thomas and Michael sat with him, all of them pretending not to be watching even though they absolutely were. When Daniel and Katherine returned an hour later, she was wearing a simple gold band on her left hand, and both of them were glowing with happiness. The ring had been Sarah's, one that Fletcher had given to Daniel the night before with instructions to take good care of it. "We are getting married," Katherine announced, her voice ringing with joy. "Daniel asked me to be his wife, and I said yes." Thomas and Michael cheered and rushed to congratulate their brother, pounding him on the back and teasing him mercilessly. Fletcher walked over to Katherine and took her hands in his. "Welcome to the family," he said sincerely. "I know Sarah would have loved you. She always wanted a daughter." Katherine's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for taking me in," she said, "for giving me a chance when you did not have to. You and your sons saved my life in more ways than one." "You have been good for us too," Fletcher said. "This house needed a woman's touch again. It needed laughter and life. You brought that back to us." They set the wedding for December, giving themselves time to prepare and allowing Katherine to make a proper dress. The women of Dalhart rallied around her, donating fabric and lace, helping with the sewing. It was a testament to how thoroughly Katherine had been accepted into the community. In November, word came that the Rangers had tracked down and arrested 5 men suspected of being part of the gang that attacked the wagon train. Captain Brennan rode out to the ranch to give Katherine the news personally. "We will need you to come to Amarillo to identify them," he told her. "The trial will be sometime in the spring. I know it will not be easy, but your testimony is crucial." Katherine agreed without hesitation. "I will do whatever it takes to see justice done." Daniel insisted on accompanying her to Amarillo when the time came. Fletcher, seeing the protective way his son stood beside Katherine, knew his boy was going to be a good husband. The trip took 3 days, and when they returned, Katherine looked exhausted but relieved. "I identified 3 of them for certain," she told Fletcher. "Men I saw clearly during the attack. The Rangers think they have enough evidence to convict." "Good," Fletcher said. "Then you can put this behind you and focus on the future." The wedding took place on December 15, 1887, in the small white church in Dalhart. Katherine wore a dress of cream-colored silk that the ladies of the town had made for her, with lace borrowed from the preacher's wife. She carried a bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers, and she looked more beautiful than Fletcher had ever seen her. Daniel stood at the altar in his best suit, scrubbed clean and nervous, his brothers beside him as groomsmen. Fletcher sat in the front pew, feeling the absence of Sarah keenly but also feeling her approval. She would have loved this, would have loved Katherine, would have been so proud of their son. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Daniel kissed his bride, the small church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the hotel, with food donated by half the town and music provided by a fiddle player who worked at the general store. Fletcher watched Daniel and Katherine dance, saw the way they looked at each other, and felt a profound sense of peace. His son had found love in the most unexpected way, and it was genuine and true. Whatever challenges they would face in the years to come, they would face them together. As the party wound down and people began to head home, Katherine came over to where Fletcher was standing. "Thank you," she said, hugging him tightly, "for everything, for taking me in, for accepting me, for raising such a wonderful son." "You take care of each other," Fletcher said gruffly, emotion thick in his throat. "That is all I ask." "We will," Katherine promised. Daniel and Katherine spent their wedding night at the hotel in Dalhart, before returning to the ranch the next day. Fletcher had cleared out the old foreman's cabin that stood about 100 yards from the main house, fixing it up as a wedding present. It was small but sturdy, with a good stone fireplace and new furniture that he and the younger boys had built. The newlyweds moved in immediately, delighted with their own space. Katherine threw herself into making it a home, hanging curtains and arranging the few possessions she had. Daniel built her shelves for books and dishes, a table for the kitchen area, a bench for the porch. Life settled into a new rhythm. Daniel and Katherine were still very much part of the ranch's daily operations, taking meals with Fletcher and the boys most days, but they also had their private time in the cabin. Fletcher could hear Katherine's laughter sometimes in the evenings, carried on the wind, and it made him smile. In the spring of 1888, the trial of the wagon train attackers took place in Amarillo. Katherine and Daniel traveled there again, and Katherine spent 2 days on the witness stand, recounting the horror of that day. It was difficult and traumatic, but the jury convicted all 5 men. 3 were sentenced to hang and 2 received long prison terms. When Katherine returned from the trial, she seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. "It is over," she told Fletcher. "I can truly move forward now." "I am glad," Fletcher said sincerely. In June, Katherine made an announcement at Sunday dinner that had all of them cheering. She was expecting a baby, due in late December or early January. Daniel was over the moon with excitement, already planning additions to the cabin and talking about names. Fletcher felt his throat tighten with emotion. A grandchild. Sarah should have been here to see this, to help Katherine through the pregnancy, to hold the baby when it arrived. But she was not, and so Fletcher did his best to fill that role, offering what wisdom he could. Katherine's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. She remained active and healthy, still cooking for the family and tending her garden until she grew too large to bend over comfortably. The women of Dalhart threw her a party, bringing gifts of baby clothes and blankets and advice. In December, as the first anniversary of their wedding approached, Katherine went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. Daniel was beside himself with worry, pacing the porch of the cabin while the doctor and a midwife from town tended to Katherine inside. Fletcher sat with his son, offering what comfort he could. "Your mother's labor with you took nearly a full day," he said. "These things take time. Katherine is strong. She will be fine." Finally, in the early afternoon of December 16th, the baby arrived. A boy, healthy and squalling, with a good set of lungs and a head full of dark hair. Daniel was allowed inside to meet his son, and when he emerged 20 minutes later, he was crying openly. "He is perfect," Daniel said, his voice choked with emotion. "Katherine is exhausted, but she is fine. The baby is perfect." They named him Fletcher Daniel Vaughn, after his grandfather and father. Little Fletcher, as they called him to avoid confusion, was a content baby who ate well and slept reasonably well, and seemed to enjoy being passed around among his many admirers. Thomas and Michael doted on their nephew, competing for who could make him smile first. Fletcher held his grandson for the first time on a cold December evening, looking down at the tiny face and feeling the weight of legacy and future all at once. "You are going to do great things," he whispered to the baby. "Your mama is the strongest woman I know, and your papa is the best man. You are lucky to have them." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, with Daniel taking on more and more responsibility as Fletcher slowly stepped back. Katherine proved to be not just a wonderful mother, but also a skilled ranch manager, with a head for numbers and organization that helped them run the operation more efficiently. Little Fletcher was joined by a sister, Sarah Katherine, in 1890, named for the grandmother she would never meet. Then came another boy, Robert, in 1892, named for the fiancé Katherine had never married, a gesture of respect for the path she had not taken. And finally, a third boy, James, in 1894. Fletcher watched his family grow and flourish with a deep sense of satisfaction. His sons Thomas and Michael eventually married as well, bringing their wives to live on the ranch, building their own cabins. The property that Fletcher had worked so hard to build became a true family compound, full of children and laughter and life. Katherine never forgot where she came from or how she had arrived at the Vaughn Ranch. Every year on the anniversary of the wagon train attack, she would light a candle in church for the people who had died. She corresponded with the families of the victims, some of whom had survived because they had sent their loved ones ahead or chosen a different route. She also became an advocate for women traveling alone or in vulnerable situations, working with the church to create a fund that would help those in need. It was her way of honoring the second chance she had been given. In 1897, 10 years after Katherine had stumbled into their kitchen in the pre-dawn darkness, Fletcher gathered his entire family for a special dinner. All of his sons were there with their wives and children, the main house bursting at the seams with people. Katherine had cooked a feast, helped by her sisters-in-law, and the table groaned under the weight of food. Fletcher stood at the head of the table and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice carrying over the chatter. 10 years ago, a stranger appeared in our kitchen, frightened and alone with nowhere else to go. My sons, they looked at me with such hope in their eyes, silently begging me to help her. I am not ashamed to say that their compassion pushed me to do the right thing." He looked at Katherine, who was wiping her eyes with her napkin. "Katherine, you have been a blessing to this family in ways I cannot even count. You made my son happy, gave me grandchildren, brought life back into this house. I thank God every day that you found your way to us. Here, here." Daniel called out, raising his own glass. To Katherine, the whole family chorused. Katherine stood, her face flushed with emotion. "I have to say something too," she said. "I was running for my life that night with no hope and no plan, just pure survival instinct. I saw lights in the distance and walked toward them without knowing what I would find. I found a family. I found love. I found a home. You all saved me in every way a person can be saved. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." She looked at Daniel, who was smiling at her with such love in his eyes. "And I will spend the rest of my life loving this man who saw past my fear and my brokenness and chose me anyway." The dinner dissolved into tears and laughter, with the children confused by all the emotions but happy to be included. Later, after everyone had eaten themselves into a stupor and the youngest children had been put to bed, Fletcher sat on his porch with Daniel and Katherine. "Papa, I have been meaning to talk to you about something," Daniel said. "You have been stepping back from the ranch work more and more, and I think it is time to make it official. I want to buy the ranch from you, keep it in the family." Fletcher had been expecting this conversation for a while. At 52, he was not old, but the hard years of ranch work had taken their toll. His joints ached in the cold, and he tired more easily than he used to. The idea of stepping back fully, of letting Daniel take over, was both appealing and frightening. "What would I do with myself?" he asked. "Whatever you want," Katherine said gently. "Read, fish, spend time with your grandchildren. You have worked hard your whole life, Fletcher. You deserve to rest." "Let me think about it," Fletcher said, though he already knew what his answer would be. In the end, he agreed, and in early 1898 the ranch officially passed to Daniel. Fletcher retained a small portion of the profits and the right to live in the main house for as long as he wanted, but the day-to-day operations were now Daniel's responsibility. It was strange at first, not having the weight of the ranch on his shoulders, but Fletcher adjusted. He spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope and all the skills he had taught his own sons. He read books that he had never had time for, and he took up woodworking, making toys and furniture for the growing brood of Vaughn children. Katherine made sure he was never lonely or forgotten. She included him in every family decision, asked his advice even when she probably did not need it, and made sure he knew he was valued and loved. She treated him not just as her father-in-law, but as the father she had lost when she was young. The years continued to pass. The new century arrived, bringing changes and challenges. The railroad expanded, making it easier to ship cattle but also bringing more people to Texas. The wild, untamed prairie of Fletcher's youth was becoming settled and civilized. In 1905, Fletcher celebrated his 60th birthday surrounded by his family. There were so many grandchildren now that he sometimes lost count, with Thomas and Michael contributing to the chaos. The main house and all the cabins were full, and there was talk of building even more structures to accommodate everyone. "Did you ever imagine it would be like this?" Katherine asked him during the party. She was 42 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, but she was still beautiful, still full of life and energy. "Never," Fletcher admitted. "When Sarah died, I thought the best years were behind me. I thought I would just raise my boys and work the ranch until I was too old to continue. I never imagined all of this." "Life has a way of surprising us," Katherine said. "I certainly never imagined I would end up here, married to a wonderful man, mother to 4 children, grandmother already to 2. Her eldest, little Fletcher, had married the previous year and just welcomed his first child. "You ever think about that other life?" Fletcher asked. "The one you would have had if you had made it to California?" Katherine shook her head. "Not anymore. I used to in the early days wonder what would have happened, but this is my life now and I would not trade it for anything. Everything I went through, all the pain and fear, it brought me here. It brought me to Daniel. I cannot regret that." "I am glad," Fletcher said sincerely. In 1910, Fletcher's health began to decline. The doctor said it was his heart, worn out from too many years of hard work and stress. There was nothing to be done except rest and take it easy, which Fletcher did with as much grace as he could muster. He hated being weak, hated needing help with simple tasks, but his family rallied around him. Daniel and Katherine moved him into their cabin so they could care for him more easily. Katherine nursed him with the same fierce compassion she had shown when she first arrived, and Fletcher found himself thinking often of Sarah. He hoped she was proud of the family they had built, proud of the man their son had become. One evening in late spring, Fletcher sat on the porch of Daniel and Katherine's cabin, wrapped in blankets despite the warmth. The sun was setting in a spectacular display of color, and he could hear children playing in the distance, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Daniel sat beside him, and for a long while they just enjoyed the quiet companionship. Finally, Fletcher spoke. "I am proud of you, son," he said. "Proud of the man you have become, proud of the family you have built. You have done everything right." "I learned from the best," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "No, you learned from your mother," Fletcher said with a slight smile. "I just tried not to mess it up too badly." "You did more than that, Papa. You taught me how to work hard, how to be fair, how to treat people with respect. You taught me that doing the right thing is not always easy, but it is always worth it. And you showed me, by taking Katherine in when she needed help, what it means to have compassion." Fletcher reached over and gripped his son's hand. "Take care of her, Daniel. Take care of all of them. This family is the most important thing. Nothing else matters as much." "I will," Daniel promised. "I swear it." Fletcher passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 nights later on May 22, 1910. He was 65 years old. The entire community of Dalhart turned out for his funeral, a testament to the respect he had earned over his decades in Texas. He was laid to rest beside Sarah in the small cemetery on the edge of town, finally reunited with the woman he had loved. The ranch continued to thrive under Daniel's leadership, with Katherine as his partner in all things. Their children grew and married, bringing new generations into the family. The story of how Katherine had appeared in their kitchen that long-ago morning became family legend, told and retold to each new child born into the Vaughn line. Daniel and Katherine lived long, full lives, eventually passing the ranch on to their own children just as Fletcher had passed it to Daniel. They saw grandchildren and great-grandchildren, watched the world change in ways they could never have imagined when they first met. Through it all, their love remained constant, a foundation that held firm through every storm. When Katherine was an old woman in her 80s, sitting on the porch of the ranch house that had been her home for over 60 years, she would sometimes think back to that terrifying night when she had stumbled through the darkness, certain she was going to die. She had found a light in the distance and walked toward it, not knowing it would lead her to everything she had ever wanted. She thought about the kindness of a rancher who had taken in a stranger despite the danger it might bring. She thought about the compassion of 3 young boys who had silently begged their father to let her stay. And she thought about a young man with kind eyes who had fallen in love with a broken, frightened woman, and had spent the rest of his life making sure she never felt afraid again. Daniel passed away in 1925 at the age of 57, his heart giving out while he was working in the barn, doing what he loved until the very end. Katherine mourned him deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by love, before she too passed peacefully in her sleep in 1933. She was 71 years old. Her children laid her to rest beside Daniel in the Dalhart Cemetery, not far from where Fletcher and Sarah were buried. 4 generations of Vaughns attended her funeral, a testament to the family she had helped build from nothing. The ranch remained in the Vaughn family for generations, a testament to hard work and love, and the strange twist of fate that had brought a desperate woman to a ranch house kitchen one dark morning in 1887. The story of Katherine and Daniel became the foundation myth of the family, proof that sometimes the most unexpected moments can lead to the greatest blessings. And if you were to visit that cemetery in Dalhart, Texas, even today, you would find 4 headstones in a row. Fletcher Vaughn and Sarah, his beloved wife, and beside them, Daniel Vaughn and Katherine, his beloved wife. The dates tell a story of lives well lived, of love found and lost and found again, of family and legacy and the enduring power of compassion in a hard world.